Thank you very much for joining us. I'll get my colleagues on the bridge today to introduce themselves first, and then we'll run through a short presentation regarding some of the findings from a survey which will explain more of the background to, and a lot of the insights that came out of that hopefully you'll find useful. We'll try and keep the presentation aspect of this reasonably crisp, but we're going to do it in a Q&A format amongst ourselves, the presenters, and then handing over to you, the audience. We've already had a number of questions submitted in advance, for which we genuinely appreciate those, and we'll try to answer them as we go through. And we look forward to doing as many more as possible at the end. So if you haven't met me already, I'm Tim Barclay. I'm the CEO of Appello. I've had the privilege of running the organization for about 3.5 years now. And we'll say a little bit more about who Appello are as we get into the body of the discussion. Mark, can I get you to say a few words next?
Hi, I'm Mark Stratford. I'm the Commercial Director for Appello.
And Ian.
Hi, I'm Ian Hockings. I'm Head of Marketing at Appello. I'll be monitoring the questions throughout the presentation. So if you do want to post a question, use the Q&A functionality found at the bottom of your screen.
Great stuff. And Jeremy?
Hi there, everybody. I'm First Officer. Thank you, Captain Barclay, from the Housing, Learning and Improvement App. I'm the Chief Exec and really pleased to have partnered with Appello for these reports.
Great stuff. Okay. Ian, if you could either enable my sharing screen or if you could share the presentation, whichever's easiest. And then we'll run through a few slides that we think will give structure to the discussion. If you've been on one of these before, you'll know we try and keep it as informal and informative as possible. We're very conscious that we want to make the best use of your time. And to do that, we will use the structure that we've used on previous occasions. So first of all, we are on the third of our 3 reports, on the back of the research that was done following a survey around circa 120 of the Housing LIN members, senior housing officers, and across a very broad spectrum of both roles, levels of types of organisation, and breadth of experience. And that has been very helpful and very informative in creating a number of reports. And each of those reports had a particular theme to it. This one is very much around the main trends that you'll see during 2021. We certainly have found the insights from this really useful because within Appello, we focus very much on digital technology-enabled care services solutions. We have by far the most advanced digital telecare monitoring platform. It's currently handled over 2 million end-to-end digital calls, which is more than every other monitoring centre in the UK put together in terms of genuine end-to-end digital calls. We consistently exceed any of the industry standards regarding the QSF or TSA performance KPIs. The second part to our business is our communal solutions for digital living, and Smart Living Solutions is a system which we've designed which replaces the analog clunky warden call system of the last few decades with something that's non-stigmatizing, much faster and therefore much safer, much more resilient, and a great deal more interactive, giving residents real benefits in terms of their quality of their life. So we're proud of what we've done so far, and we're looking forward to building on that with the help of the insights we've gained from this report. Jeremy, do you want to say a few words about the Housing LIN?
Well, means Tim, yeah. For those of you who don't know, the Housing LIN was actually born out of the Department of Health, where we oversaw 2 major capital investment streams, one for extra care housing and retirement living, and the other to accompany the building telecare in England grants that were allocated primarily to local authorities. And as a result of that, the LIN has done a lot of work around sharing best practice and the learning across England, Scotland and Wales to look at what is innovation out there in terms of the way way we live, both in specialist housing and retirement housing, but also in more mainstream housing solutions as well. And just to conclude, that some of you may be aware that we're very much associated with the happy design principles, the Housing Our Ageing Population Panel for Innovation. Well, earlier today at the Social Services Annual Conference, I was able to share news that we're creating a sister set of principles called TAPI, Technology to Aid Our Ageing Population Panel for Innovation. And we very much look forward to engaging with you, Tim, and colleagues, and the wider sector as part of that.
If anybody is looking for information sources regarding moving to a more digital or a totally digital, or just a better way of housing and helping elderly, vulnerable, and the general population, then the Housing LIN has an amazing set of resources available. As part of the distribution of this presentation afterwards, we'll make sure we link those as well. In terms of the particular reports that we're talking about today, it's based around the 6 trends that we think, based on the survey responses, are the most compelling and the most likely to gain real traction during 2021. A number of them have already started to show signs of momentum, but I think we feel and already see that there's going to be a step change during 2021. And some of that's about COVID, but some of that's also just about the understanding of the benefits of digital and the move as we get closer and closer to the closure of the analog network in 2025, and a greater realization that just because it closes in 2025, that doesn't mean it works well up until that time. So the 6 trends that we think are most compelling, that are covered in the report, are the ones listed in front of you. Digital being a primary driver now for adoption of wider services, smart homes and the way that they can be used, the degree to which data can drive intelligence and better decision making, the amount of collaboration potential that Housing LIN and other organizations are bringing in terms of best practice opportunities, as well as suppliers bringing more integrated solutions, cloud and cloud services being a greater underpinning architecture for all of this innovation, and then commercial models which more replicate those in parts of other sectors of industry that have been commonplace to us, also starting to prevail within the TECS marketplace. Of those 6 trends, we've in previous presentations covered the benefits of digital to a large degree, and also spent quite a bit of time talking about cloud. So rather than repeat ourselves for some of those regular viewers, those are still available on the replays, but we thought we would focus on the 4 of those 6 that we've given less airtime to previously. If I start with the first one, so the second, but the first of today's presentation, that's all about how smarter housing can really make a difference. Some of the things the report told us, and that was underpinned by the survey, is that the growing adoption of digital TECS services creates a pathway for better, more integrated and smarter devices within the homes. And certainly we saw fantastic examples during COVID across our own customer base about how the remote working and the digital diagnostics capabilities of smart living solutions could be used to ensure that residents and end customers and service users were still provided with a level of service and supervision and support, but without necessarily the on-site members or the on-site staff being present in the same way. We also are seeing more and more interest during the course of this year, which we're certain will accelerate in future years, within learning difficulties, Alzheimer's, dementia, and other particular specialized housing situations where some type of basic home automation can be a real boon. And without doubt, we think that a smarter home will be one of the big winning trends of 2021 and beyond. On the right-hand side of the slide are some of the questions that have been posed to us either in advance as pre-questions or ones which have been posed by customers to us over the days and weeks recently. And I'll get Mark and Jeremy to offer their views against these particular questions. Mark, does delivering a smart home, I mean, is it really an achievable thing for most housing organisations? And go on, you give some thoughts.
Sorry. Yeah, I think it is. I think we're seeing some housing providers already delivering basic smart home services because it can make a real difference to the experience and to a certain extent the safety in supported housing. And even if it's the very basic of, you know, open and closing blinds or curtains, something that might be difficult for somebody with limited dexterity, but smart home can really help out with things like this. And some of the technology is really, really simple. And I think, you know, even now, some of our customers are going to be expecting these capabilities. And you know, we know that digital means that we don't have to have one solution for all anymore. It's about enabling choice. It's about delivering these solutions to benefit the resident.
One of the aspects, I think that's absolutely right. One of the aspects which we've all understood becomes even more powerful, particularly during COVID, but just generally, is around the whole digital inclusion piece. And at a very basic level, a smart home is one which has availability and connection to the internet widely distributed and within each resident's apartment. So I think that's, as a small building block for many housing providers and local authorities, ensuring that solutions they provide offer up Wi-Fi connectivity, as an example, will be part and parcel of how that connected home, smart home, start to become a reality for organisations both big and small. Jeremy, you'll have a view, I'm certain, on the degree to which social care budgets in the future are likely to be more attuned to looking at the width of ways you can support people's well-being, just rather than having a very traditional view that it was all about a telecare or other fairly proprietary device.
You're absolutely right, Tim. And I think what we're moving quickly from is something which is about smarter technology to also how commissioners, they themselves can be smarter in how they commission and procure equipment, kit, digital, to support them in a number of ways, both in terms of their case management. So again, the interaction and the networking through communications, so that they can make informed decisions quickly. The other thing is where providing that information for customers, for people on social care eligibility. And I think thirdly, it's where it interacts and relates to other activities that support their daily living. So whether it's the sensor technology, whether it's around the adaptation to their particular home, or indeed other aspects of their lives, for example, gaming, lifestyle activities, you know, leisure and retail. So I think social care budgets can become much more in tune with smart home technology. I think there's a bit of learning that still needs to take place and to explore and explain the benefits and the value, and perhaps thinking further afield, if I may, just to think. We've heard a bit about how to create personal budgets and individual budgets for people. Should we be putting a case for a personal telecare or digital budget so that people can know at a very low cost that they can have this as a platform and then they themselves can build onto it to meet their particular needs? I
think that's absolutely part and parcel of what the TSA, the TECS Services Association, for those not familiar with it, are lobbying for, and I think there's a number of us who would absolutely support those calls, partly because, you know, candidly it's in our interest, but secondly because it's proven to an enormous scale that providing people with a greater level of independence absolutely helps them have a better quality of life, and that creates a lower demand overall on the social care system.
Absolutely.
And Mark, in terms of how tech suppliers can help with the introduction of smart technology, smart home technology, offer a few thoughts on that if you would.
I think so, looking at the whole spectrum of devices and services across all types of housing. Sometimes when we talk about smart home equipment, we just think about one home. So, you know, as I've mentioned, opening blinds or curtains, but there's other things that we consider. So, for example, monitoring a boiler or a heating system in sheltered accommodation, where actually a boiler failure in the winter is a real problem for a number of people. A very simple monitored tech, letting people know if a boiler might need servicing, if it's about to go faulty or if it has gone faulty, can make a real difference to a whole load of people rather than just individuals.
Absolutely. I think that's one of the greatest examples of how homes, whether they're communal or individual, can get that little bit smarter and as a result offer a better quality living experience.
Absolutely,
Excellent.
Tim. And could I just add to that, just that this is where the work we're doing with TAPI is really trying to take forward, how to align building management systems with care management systems, with health interventions as well. So the fact that you have a common platform and you're able to poll that data so that you can sort of look right across the living experience of the occupier, rather than having to have 25 different people going in or 400 different pieces of kit to support that person.
That's a great call out. So to any of our audience today, there's a wide variety of different housing organisations and local authorities who are present. So if you'd like to contribute to the thinking that Jeremy and the wider organisations are participating in to create the TAPI recommendations, then please do get in touch. The contact details will be circulated with the follow-up email coming out of this. Excellent. Okay, so on to our next slide. And if we move through, we're now talking about the third of the 6 themes, which is a very natural lead on from the smart home capabilities that we've just had a discussion around. And this is the degree to which, and we're hearing this phrase in every aspect of business and every part of society, that data and better data will start to drive better decision intelligence. I think it was very clear from the report and from the survey that technology-enabled care services are now seen very much as being part of the Internet of Things, and that the Internet of Things has a great deal to contribute towards TECS as a whole. It's because a number of individual sensors and monitors can start to help create a richer picture. It is so much more, though, than just the intelligence from those individual devices. Pure play activity monitoring, for example, in the home, gives you something of a picture of a resident's well-being, and it's genuinely insightful. But it's so much richer when you combine that with a set of Bluetooth scales, for example, and a Fitbit or an Apple Watch or some other cheaper activity monitoring device, so that you understand a broader picture of how active they are in their home, how active they are outside of their home, but also how that's reflecting in their well-being, measured through perhaps the weight or through glucometers, oximeters, blood pressure monitors, and so on. All of these can help create a very rich picture, but it is about how you combine those rather than any individual data point being the single nugget that will be insightful all on its own. I think it's very clear from the number of innovation businesses that we've been approached by and that we've seen out in the market, that there is a growing trend towards a number of different available products which can help give those individual data points what I think is so important, and the reason why cloud is a really big part of this whole story, is that it's going to be the data integration engines. And that sounds like a big phrase, but it's all about organizations like ourselves and others taking various inputs and giving simplistic, easy to read dashboards which are insightful based on a number of different data points. Now, I think the question on the right-hand side probably plays very much to the fear that this will be all about big data, and how can average housing staff really be expected to cope with all of that. But I think it's about the simplicity, isn't it, Mark? It's about how data is presented and the types of data and how meaningful it is.
I think that's the key, Tim. It's what data is really meaningful. And once we understand that, then you can deliver something that makes sense and adds value. You know, that we know there's a huge amount of data available, but suppliers like ourselves need to filter that data, then present it back in a format that people understand, and, as you've already said, provides real insight. I think once we get to that point, and once we can understand that it is valuable and it's meaningful, then professionals that can consume this data will see the benefits, and that's when people start to embrace it.
I think we've got some real case studies that we gained during COVID and before COVID around how some of the capabilities that we provide, the simple dashboards such as our single best record web app, which provides insight into call traffic from particular communal living developments, into residents' needs and device availability, all of that configured in a very simple, easy to interact with web available application, has proven a great way to help make housing staff be more productive, even when they can't necessarily spend as much time with their customers as they would naturally like. I think, Jeremy, there's a real role for government in terms of helping thinking the care white paper that we're expecting and the wider summation of what we've learned from COVID and how that influences the social care environment and the housing landscape, how those come together in and use and share data more commonly is, I know, something you and the Housing LIN have given some thought to.
Yeah, absolutely. And at a national level, the sort of the dashboards that you talked about, what we're seeing is that some of the sort of the information that's polled by Public Health England, by MHCLG, by NHS England Social Care, they're often standstill data sets. And what we're able to do is to look at what are the sort of commonalities and what's the silver thread across those, to think about the implications of one's health, the condition that one has, the housing condition one has, and the types of interventions that are needed. And it's about being very subtly using the data and looking at about integrating it in a way that becomes much more user-centric, as opposed to being something about resource allocation. Now, while resource allocation is really fundamental, because it's about how we can afford and pay for this, at the same time, if we don't have that type of data, we may be making the wrong investment decisions and, or, God forbid, the wrong interventions as well. So one things I'm encouraged by is that, yes, you mentioned the Social Care Green Paper. It's a commission that's been pulled together, chaired by Paul Buster, who also chairs the TSA, who is looking at this in relation to the housing economy. We're part of the commission group, and we're trying to put in as many good practice examples as possible. But one of the missing links for me at the moment is MHCLG, because it has also got a challenge to the nation to build 300,000 new homes per annum. And this is not specialist housing, this is all types of housing, including specialist housing. And one of the things it's looking at in terms of that, in terms of the data at a local level, is how much can we improve the scale of supply. And some of that is about doing off-site manufacturing and modern methods of construction. Here is an ideal opportunity to weave in digital right at that stage when we both design the product, but also think how those products are going to be lived in.
I think that's great. And you're sensing within government and more widely across the social and housing landscapes that there's a growing appetite for a greater level of data and insight to drive quality decision making?
Yes, I don't know if you know, but the industrial strategy that the government set out a few years back now has a challenge for healthy aging for our sector, which is about extending the healthy lives of our residents and our citizens by 5 added years. Part of that is partly to drive digital and technology to provide better quality services in the home at a better price. And I can see that this fits in very neatly with the sort of findings that have come out of the latest report.
Excellent. Very good. And that to some extent supports our next, the third of the 4 themes we're going to cover today, the 4th theme in the report, which is about the degree to which collaboration between housing, between health, between social care, but also between different invested bodies within and best practice organizations within the sector can really help drive the acceleration of new ideas, because it's not about learning once, it's about learning from others who've already gone through the pain. I think the majority of housing providers are in a similar position in the sense that they need to make progress on their digital and their transformation agendas over the course of the next year and years beyond that. But at the same time, there's resource constraints, there are challenges with budgets, and being able to draw upon the best practice that's already being experienced by organizations who've gone on the digital journey, who've contributed towards the Happy Report and who are now and will participate in learning and best practice sharing through TAPI and other industry best practice mechanisms, I think is a real opportunity for housing and local authorities to be able to gain insights without having to do so much of the hard yards themselves and go through the learning curve all on their own. Mark, there are so many new areas of technology, and where do you start? How do you prioritize?
I guess it's what gives you the clearest line of sight to improving people's safety and well-being. So it could be tools that have been used during the COVID crisis, for example. So video calls between residents, site managers being able to work from home, but video call their resident from home. So I think there's lots of real examples of clear benefits, but ultimately the choice is where you see the greatest benefit and where you can execute that benefit quickly.
And I think that's the very important point from this, which is that the reason for collaborating is to understand the outcomes that can be achieved. This isn't about what's the technology I should be adopting. This is about what are the tools, of which technology, people, process are all examples that can help me get to a whatever the corporate goal is, the better living experience, the safer well-being, whatever the corporate ambitions are. It's about understanding very much what those are. But certainly what we're seeing is, and what we really believe will accelerate during 2021, is the TSA, the Housing LIN, and the various different workshops, inputs, outputs that they're creating and sharing, being a really great central repository for best practice to enable and to avoid reinventing the wheel. Jeremy, if you were to invest in one innovation in 2021, where do you think where do you think people should turn their attention?
Oh, that's a really good question. I think my personal view is how do we mainstream broadband? I think it's about the platform so that you can then segment.
And by broadband, you mean connectivity, I guess.
Connectivity, that's right. We ran a little workshop with our Welsh members on Tuesday afternoon, and we had an excellent presentation from the Deputy Director of Specialist Housing for a local housing association called United Welsh. They've been running a programme called Thrive, and they realised that a number of their residents are actually digitally excluded. And over COVID, that has been exacerbated and also had a significant impact on their mental health, loneliness and isolation. I think some of the points that you and Mark raised earlier. There's no doubt they're now doing this by introducing improved connectivity. This enables both the professional to customer relationship, but more importantly, the customer to their other customers, and that sort of community spirit that I talked about at the outset has enabled them to participate, albeit virtually, much more with their friends and neighbours and families. And that, under COVID, has really reduced that. As a result, for housing operators, it's meant that it has a chance to reduce some of the housing management interventions or triage them to the most important ones, because other ones can be either self-managed out or can be dealt with by email.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there won't be anybody on the call who isn't aware about the risks of social isolation as a result of both physical but also digital separation from the rest of society. And we in Appello, we believe passionately that's in a vital way that 2021 and beyond will see a greater improvement in well-being, particularly in those most vulnerable categories. We've seen great examples and got great case studies of the extra level of well-being that we've been able to generate through the deployment of smart living solutions and some of our other wider well-being TECS. And I do think that if we look at where best practice is going to lead, and you use a great example of it there, in these forums, understanding what it is that drives the greatest benefit and creates the greatest risk by not being invested in, I think it's a real platform for the best practice to be more widely understood and disseminated. And I also think, and Mark, we've got a strong view around this, that collaboration isn't just about that best practice sharing, it's also creating platforms which are multi-vendor. Do you want to say a few words about that?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It's about the platform that's multi-vendor, and it's about the scalability and the ability of the platform to adopt new innovation and integration as well. So, talk about what I know about. We have an SLS platform which sends monitoring calls to a monitoring centre, but also we've got a back office platform that allows us to blend monitoring data with third-party data sets. So it allows the integration of smart devices and other third-party devices, but to share that data set. And it's the ability to scale that and to add to that, which is going to improve and give us much better outcomes in the near to medium futures.
And you think that collaboration across multiple vendors using industry standard common protocols, rather than perhaps historically there's been a tendency that each manufacturer stuck to their own protocol and created an island as a result. Do you think that's one of the trends that's going to continue to emerge 2021 and beyond?
I think it has to be. We're very fortunate that British standards and European standards have been completed and are available for everybody to use. So we have to embrace the standards. They have to be open standards, and it's what the whole industry has to aspire to now and for the future.
We certainly think it's a fundamental part of how housing providers and local authorities minimise reinvestment and maximise common platforms that they can plug and play various different best-of-breed devices into. And all of that sounds like it's it's very high end and very sophisticated, but in actual fact, it's a very practical and sensible way of running any type of procurement exercise. And it leads us beautifully into the last of the 4 themes from the report, which was the theme number 6, flexible payment models gaining traction. If you think about our sector, and then you think about sectors outside of ours, it's very commonplace for people to lease cars, for people to lease their mobile phones, for laptops or other technology devices, to be on a pay-as-you-go style model. Whereas typically in TECS, I think what we've seen is that it's been a capital purchase. And while that's absolutely fine, if that really is the preferred the preferred payment methodology, it shouldn't be assumed that that's the only way. There are some real advantages, I think, and we've already seen a number of different businesses emerge in the UK who've made a strong point of the fact that it is a software as a service style model. You can scale it up, you can scale it down, depending on requirements. Now that doesn't always work in every scenario, but we're certainly expecting to see much more flexible commercial arrangements. And Mark, do you want to give a flavour of what you think the benefits of those could be to housing providers and local authorities?
Yeah, I think the benefits, the biggest benefit certainly of a rental or a tech refresh model where equipment's updated at a specific time is the fact that now technology is moving at a much faster pace. And in the future, what's going to happen is we need the ability to embrace the new models of care. And these will become available as technology moves. What we need to be able to do now is keep up with the technology and the ability to deliver new models of care and new services as they become available.
And give us a practical example of that. What might that look or feel like for somebody on this call?
So if I just take an example of video technology. So if I look at technology that's in the field now with analog systems, they could be 10, 15 years old. There's no way that when video came along that they could embrace that technology. Had the room units been upgraded 5 years ago with a newer room unit, then video technology becomes instantly available. And as we move forward, more technology, for example, more sensors going into room units, Bluetooth sensors, additional wireless sensors, we need to be able to consume the technology, to be able to consume the data, to be able to deliver the services.
I think that's very, very clear. And the flexibility you think that this will offer in terms of short-term, long-term budgets, the degree to which it helps with future transformations?
I think it's going to make a huge difference because the flexibility means that we can really tailor the care packages for the individual that's consuming the care. And the more flexible we have, the more choice we have, the more that it would also drive down the cost of some of these packages.
Jeremy, you often find yourself at the epicenter of discussions around care budgets, housing budgets, and how you see that model playing out over the months and years ahead. What would you offer as insights?
For me, there's a capital budget you can depreciate. So I think there's always going to be an element, whether it's the hardwiring or the kit. So it is something that operators will put into their budgets. The real challenge is how they then have to manage the revenue to provide the support, or indeed for the people themselves to provide the support. And that's where it really is about how do we create an affordable market, which is affordable for all. So people at a high end who have wealth, as well as people who have health needs, who may only be able to afford a couple of pounds a week, or may indeed be on housing benefit, or now on universal credit as a result of COVID. So again, there are some real issues around where these budgets are. You're absolutely right. Hence why I was trying to toy with this idea of a personal telecare or digital budget. So actually, there is sort of like a flat rate that a local authority and or a health trust might agree to in terms of what it agrees would be a recognised fee level, so that you can then have that sliding scale and plug and play with the reassurance that the operator, the provider, perhaps through rent, is going to meet the capital outlay.
Yes. Yeah. Mark, these models will be a little more different. Typically, a lot of housing providers and local authorities are procured simply on a capital purchase model. How do you think they'll do the comparison in a more software as a service style, tech refresh type of value assessment?
I think the first thing is, frameworks need to be updated to reflect new procurement models. And I think manufacturers need to be a lot more creative when we're considering whole life procurement. So as you've mentioned, that includes tech refresh, that includes midlife equipment upgrades. And of course, moving forwards where we're delivering more and more services through a SaaS model, it allows us to do regular upgrades, certainly from software, which can be pushed out from the cloud to local equipment. So I think there's quite a bit of work to do across the procurement services field, really.
Well, we've certainly struck a number of chords based on the number of questions that have come in so far. So I'm keen to get on to the Q&A. I will just do a couple of plugs. So firstly, a reminder that the 3 reports that have been published so far, of which today was a summary of some of the learnings in the main trends, but also there was the first report around telecare learnings from COVID, and the second report about enablers of a better quality living experience. All of those are still available from the Appello website or via the Housing LIN's excellent base of collateral. And on that subject, just as a final plug, there are a number of different locations you can go to for some continued insights into best practice and quality thinking and research in the digital transformation and future TECS services learnings. Our own website and the blog that we post, Housing LIN, as I mentioned, some fantastic collateral in there and updated every single week. And the TSA also has a number of different web pages where there's some really good insights you can gain. So with all of that plugged, I think we should move to Q&A. So I'll stop sharing the slides. And Ian, I can see we've got 8 or 9 questions, I think, in the queue. Let's work our way through them.
Yeah, so just a reminder, if you do want to post a question, use the Q&A functionality at the bottom, but we have a fair few to start off with. So the first one is, smart home has been around for 10 years or so. When and how will they move it into mainstream?
So that's a great question. And you could have preceded that by saying video has been around for 10 years, cloud services have been around for 10 years. I think there's 2 things that COVID has taught us. Firstly, often there is a compelling event, and I think COVID is very much a compelling event that will accelerate the adoption of smart home capabilities. I think the second thing that will make a difference, and Mark, I'll ask for your views in a moment or two, but I think the second thing that will make a difference is this ability which we and a number of other providers are developing or have developed, which creates a middleware where you can aggregate all of those data points, because just having one sensor per apartment telling you different things about different residents, or just having residents able to do one thing for themselves isn't the powerful solution that smart homes could be. So I think creating that connectivity priority that Jeremy described, first of all, using the data manipulation layers that providers like ourselves and others have, and then using the learnings and the step change that COVID has created will be what we think means 2021 is the start of a real game changer for smart homes. Mark, what would you add to that?
The only bit I'd add to that is where they more and more they begin to add value. So as you quite rightly said, with an integration layer, it's not necessarily about raising an alarm anymore. It's about all of the other data we can collect around that. So is somebody moving about? So with something as straightforward as a Fitbit, for example, if somebody's moving at regular intervals and we know roughly how many steps they take, then it's a really good indication. But we need to tie that up with how many alarm calls have they made? What are the notes that we've got from the carers? And all this needs to go together so that we've got one data set, and we've got the advantage of looking at right across the spectrum of data, not just individual pieces.
And you're creating a single dashboard rather than people having to interrogate those individual fields. That's I think you're absolutely right.
And making that available, easily available.
Cool. Ian, next question. And for all of those who've asked questions, if you feel there was a follow-on that you want to explore with us separately, then please do get in touch. All of our contact details will be shared as part of the follow-up to this. So Ian, next question, please.
Yeah, so we've talked about growing trends in individual products. Well, isn't that the problem? How can bring your own devices be integrated into systems, and who will react and act on the findings?
Yeah, so I think this touches very much on the point. That's a nice build on. So Mark, BYOD, bring your own device. What part do you see that playing in the solutions for providers?
It's playing a part as additional enablers. So it's two things. It's providers having those APIs and having the integration enablers. But the second thing I think is when you've got BYOD to do something else. So I'll give you an example of a room unit. So a video room unit is on a wall, it's screwed to the wall, it's permanently powered because that's what British standards say. But the resident says, what I'd really like to be able to do is sit in my chair and answer the door and have a video conversation with somebody. So BYOD allows us to say, well, okay, we'll have an application, we'll mirror what's on your wall. Your care is delivered primarily by the emergency alarm system, but actually what's going to assist and help that is the ability to have the non-emergency conversations, the video conversations, the social interaction conversations from my tablet on my lap.
The one thing I will add to that is that the security layer and the encryption capabilities are the single biggest part to play in that. It took us, I think I would say a good year or so back in 2018 to make sure we were comfortable that we'd really cracked that. And it's certainly something that is fundamental to bring your own device being a part of the wider solutions. Ian, next question.
Yeah, so the next question kind of leads on from what we've been discussing. So telecare and smart homes have undoubtedly benefits, but one of the problems has always been who pays for it. Do you feel the gulf between housing and health has narrowed any with regards to trying to convince health of the benefits enough for them to actually fund it?
Great question. What a great question. Jeremy, I know you are probably better placed than many people in the UK to offer a view on the degree to which you think housing and social care budgets are starting to align more.
Yeah, great question. The reality is that we're investing through housing, seeing effective savings for NHS, but often that money is not passed back to housing or indeed social care. So one of the real sort of opportunities here is how can we make sure there's some push factors here to make NHS colleagues recognise the value of these interventions. And there are some ways that government has worked with local authorities and local commissioning groups and the acute trusts through something called the Better Care Fund to look at where those budgets are pooled so they jointly commission those services. Now, the majority of that type of service that's coming through are things that support hospital discharge, are still high cost elements for the NHS, but where housing comes in and has done successfully over the last 3 or 4 years through this fund are things like home improvement agencies who are sort of doing disabled facilities grants, aids and adaptations. Why can't we extend that facility and the scope of that to include community equipment and technology as well, technology-enabled care, because ultimately the outcome is for that person to have a better quality of life at home. So yeah, there are some push factors I still think need to be put in place. But there are, again, as I said, there is a framework there that could, with a bit of imagination, be adopted and adapted locally.
We're certainly already exploring how that the BCF, the Better Care Fund, can be used intelligently, and if there are any housing authorities or local authorities on who want to work with us on exploring particular projects around that, we'd be very, very interested. We've also seen, and it's somewhat frustrating, that we've also seen that there are some localities where the housing benefit budget can incorporate some element of technology enabled care service, provided it has certain characteristics, and it's been, while it's something of a frustration for UK PLC that it's not a more widespread universal approach. Again, it's something that we'd be very happy to discuss in certain geographies where that flexibility does align, and we can only hope and certainly push and lobby for that type of approach is disseminated more widely across England and the UK.
Well, the good news is we've got
Jeremy.
NHS England. We've got a session with NHS England to oversee this programme in a couple of weeks' time. And again, it's a point that I shall be emphasising again on your behalf.
Terrific. Okay, Ian, next question. They're coming in faster than we're getting them out. I might need to make my answers a bit crisper.
To what extent do you envisage the personal data collected is shared with residents?
So only to the degree that they would like it or ask for sight of it. So clearly, if it is genuinely personal data, they will have to be. So let's take this as being activity data or telecare data. They will have to give their permissions for it being shared with anybody else. Most likely that will be with care organisations, with housing organisations, with friends and family. Of course, it would be available to residents as well, but whatever happens, it would only be with their consent. That one was a bit crisper, hopefully.
Excellent. We know technology will continue to change, so would a rental model enable us to keep up with these changes in the next few years? What will happen with our old equipment?
Yeah, I think that's very much one of the trends that we're expecting to see an acceleration of during 2021. Yeah, Mark, do you want to give a quick example of what a tech refresh model looks like as an example of how that plays out?
Yeah, so tech refresh model comes in a couple of ways. So firstly, it can be a software and a firmware upgrade. So, you go from Microsoft Windows XP to Microsoft Windows 10, for example, which gives you, you use the same piece of equipment to run it, but it's a completely different software that's running it. And the second piece is where you upgrade servers, you upgrade room units that do something different, or you upgrade hardware that does something different. Now, the old hardware obviously needs to come away and be recycled, but that can be recycled. It can also be upcycled. So it might be that hardware comes back as a board refresh, then it goes back out again as a improved piece of hardware.
And I think that upcycling is an important part of the story for 2021 and beyond, as we and every other organisation get more and more conscious of reducing the environmental impact of TECS. Ian, next question.
Does SLS, so Smart Living Solutions, give the customer connectivity to the outside world?
So that's fortunately a relatively simple one. Yes, that was the point we were referring to earlier on about the degree to which connectivity for residents can be provided through Wi-Fi hotspots. So in every apartment or in communal lounges and certain apartments on a paid for basis, there's certainly a model there. And as Jeremy mentioned, connectivity and the basic right and the implications of connectivity being in place or not being in place, we think is one of the fundamental drivers of future well-being.
Great, I'm going to group a few questions together here. So can you expand on how Appello customers are using data in their role? What data are Appello able to provide, and does Smart Living Solutions integrate with Power BI?
Okay, well, let's take that last one separately because it's related but just slightly different. So Mark, a quick view on that.
Absolutely, we integrate with Power BI. We're, in terms of back office and cloud solutions, we're at Microsoft. So everything we do is Microsoft. It's a Microsoft format. So Power BI would be a natural integrator with that.
Lovely. And in terms of those first two questions, Ian, so those were about the degree to which, as a case study, we use data to enable our housing providers to deliver better services. It broadly falls into two categories. One, it's about the well-being of a resident and the degree to which they're okay, they're not okay, and they are configuring their services to be able to give that type of insight to their house manager or housing provider. The second part is around making on-site staff who may not necessarily be on-site able to access all of the things that they would normally have to phone into a monitoring centre to gain insight into. So how many calls have I had overnight? Were there any emergency situations on my site, scheme, development, whatever language you use as a housing provider or individual residents as a local authority? Are all the devices working okay? Is anything low battery? All of these things in a modern digital world you can present in an easy to read dashboard and make a very simple assessment of where priorities should be. So those are simple examples. We've got a lot more of how we're using, well, not how we're using, but how we're providing data to housing and local authorities to enable them to be more productive and deliver better services for their residents. Next one, Ian.
The next question and comment is, we are very open and interested in partnering on technology projects, but they struggle to sustain momentum. Where have you seen this work well?
I think projects generally all benefit from two things. One, executive sponsorship, board sponsorship, or certainly senior sponsorship. But more important than that, they are successful if there are very clear benefits and outcomes from them. Where, in my experience, both within the 3 and a bit years I've been in Appello, but in the decade I was in BT before that and Vodafone before that, I've seen a number of programs, whether they're cultural change, technology change, and the success or lack of success of those is all underpinned by the degree to which those people who were rolling them out, and more importantly, those people who were having them either foisted upon them or enjoying the benefits of them, really believed in the power of the outcomes. And in our experience, if you're making a change that has a transformational benefit for residents and the housing provider, there is a real clamour to be part of it and to enjoy it. Where it is a disruption but with no evident benefit, then unfortunately those programs often are going to be the ones that struggle. So that without question, that would be my biggest observation on that question.
Great. Ali has posted a follow-on question to his previous one. So it was around bring your own devices, and it was actually who would react and act on the alerts from bring your own devices.
Sorry, whoever that was, I apologise. You did read that bit out, Ian, and I completely forgot about it. So as with all things, it's to be agreed. But in our world, we would see our monitoring centre being the initial triage place. So what you want is a dashboard that has a standard working assessment. So using Mark's example from earlier on, you've got the combination of a Fitbit and some in-room activity sensors. You've got some Bluetooth scales. You've got a, let's say that it's a hospital re-enablement case because it was a heart attack or something similar. So they've probably also got a blood pressure monitor. You want to make sure that they're up and about. You want to make sure that they're doing some activity inside and outside the house. You want to make sure that their weight is going in the direction it was supposed to do, either going up or going down. And a combination of those individual devices, rather than looking at the individual dashboards, in our case, the single best record, what we call the IO platform, takes all of those individual inputs, creates a well-being index, and then does deviation analysis. So what we're not pretending is it's machine learning. We're not pretending it's predictive analysis. It will just look at the previous days and decide if there's been a deviation from the norm. If there's a deviation from the norm, a trigger will go to whoever is agreed, but we would imagine in the first instance, that would be our monitoring center. And then depending on the processes that have been aligned on, they will either call a carer, a next of kin, a responder, or call the resident and understand why they didn't do the steps, or why their weight might have changed, or why they didn't open the fridge, or whatever the cause for concern that came out of that situation was. So whoever asked the question, Ali, or whatever the name you said was, yeah. Ian, I hope that's a fuller answer, and we're really happy to explore that in more detail separately.
So 2 questions left. So the first one is, so when you hear about Alexa, Nest, Ring, etc., you always hear about cybersecurity issues. How do we tackle that?
Hey, Mark, you're a technology guru in this space.
I can't comment about Alexa, Nest, Ring, because they have their own security standards. They have their own security protocols. What we do in terms of our services is we use Microsoft delivery. We use Azure to deliver all cloud services. Right now, Azure is probably the most secure cloud service delivery platform in the world. And that's how we deliver all of our cloud services and all of the monitoring services.
And any data we take, any devices we take inputs from or provide outputs to, the data goes through the authentication and encryption layers of Azure and resides there so that it is secure at all times. I hope that answered the question. Ian, it looks like we've still got 1 or 2 more left.
Yes, yeah, another one's come in, so we do have 2 left still. So a fairly big question. The report talks about cloud being a key trend in 2021. Where do we see this having the biggest impact?
I think it's in the amalgamation that it provides of disparate devices being able to talk to each other and provide meaningful insight. Mark, do you want to offer a view?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. So, to give an example, it's on-site staff being able to see off-site calls that happened while they weren't there from the monitoring centre, and it's things like that are going to make the immediate impact, because it's available today, and it's just rolling that out so that people understand that they can use these tools today.
And it's simple, practical stuff. Cloud sounds like it's super Microsoft edgy technology, but actually it's not. That might be how the magic happens, but it's how you turn it into usable, meaningful, value-added benefits for staff and for residents that make the difference. And I'll just give another example of how where I think cloud will see big gains during 2021 and beyond. It's about scalability. One of the great things about cloud is that we and other cloud hosted environments can scale up our requirements and scale down, for that matter, our requirements reasonably flexibly and fluidly. So you can handle peaks and spikes in demand with a lot more capability and flexibility than if you've got to go and install another server on site, or you've got to buy another piece of storage equipment, and I'm, by which I don't mean filing cabinets, but I think it's that scalability that makes a huge difference to both the resilience and the flexibility of peaks and troughs that can be handled. Okay.
Last question. Is there a standard tool that you recommend for return on investment to get strategic buy-in and investment?
Jeremy, I'll give a go at this first of all, but from your best practice industry sharing, it'd be quite interesting to get your views also on what you're seeing other organizations doing to determine ROI. From our point of view, it's relatively simple. ROI is usually measured against resource, or is usually measured against customer experience, customer retention, customer satisfaction. So it's either a mixture. It'll always be a mixture, but the degree to which it's heavily weighted financially or heavily weighted experience, quality of experience, customer experience perspective will have a view on how you do the metrics. If it's that softer side, then that will very much be around customer retention, the degree to which they become lower workload. So looking after for the sake of argument, a site of 30, 40 apartments becomes lower workload because they're happier and able to self-serve more often, would be an example of how you'd be able to measure the ROI for a business case. On the other hand, the degree to which site staff or colleagues across an organization can cover more workload because they're able to see without having to physically be on site all the time, see the dynamics that are at play, whether that's about the boiler working, whether that's about resident call traffic overnight into the monitoring center, whether that's about the well-being of particular high concern individual residents. All of those things help inform the productivity or stickiness and customer engagement that would typically fund ROI or drive the ROI. Jeremy, more widely across the sectors where you're seeing in either housing or care organizations looking at major investments in technology or technology-enabled care services, what are they typically looking at in your experience to measure ROI?
So some of it is probably a bit softer than that even, Tim. And so that presents a problem as well, because obviously it doesn't mean there's going to be necessarily hard data. But a lot of this is based on something called the ASCOT modelling tool, the Adult Social Care Outcomes tool. And there's a framework that's used by social services to assess what the meaningful activity is of individuals and the improvements to their quality of life. So that's around neighbourliness, access to social connections, issues around preventing admission into care homes and the like. But what I've seen, rather than looking at specifically around a technology-enabled care solution, I've seen it where housing with care, extra care providers have made the business case to their NHS and social services commissioning partners about why an investment into a housing development will offer some cash releasing savings to the economy, whether it's reduced home care hours, whether it's around a better alternative to residential care, or a delay or a reduced demand on NHS. And what this does, it gives a useful tool to enable people to think actually a long-term 20, 30-year investment into this, whether it's a housing scheme or supported housing scheme, means that there will be a return on investment, because we know that, in fact, in that whole economy, there'll be less dependency on more acute services. And some work we've done with Southampton City Council suggests that that could be as much as £2,000 per person who actually ends up moving into an extra care scheme. If you start scaling that up on an annual basis across 4, 5, 3, 600 people, you start getting some volume of the type of efficiency savings you can generate.
Oh, that's excellent. I mean, that is really meaningful values, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's a good negotiation point, but also it means that you get buy-in, because actually the tools that have been used are well known through social care and primary care in particular. So again, there's sort of the evidence base is something, oh, you haven't just made that up.
And for the avoidance of doubt, none of the stuff we've talked about today has been made up. It's all been concrete trends which we've seen and seen interesting insights into. We hope this has been a good use of your time. We've cleared down all of the questions, so thank you very much for those of you who stayed on the extra 10 minutes. I genuinely, well, I'm assuming the fact that you did, and I can see that almost everybody did. I take it as that's a sign that you found it of value. If there's anything you'd like to follow up with us or the Housing LIN on separately, we'd love to hear from you. And Ian will be sending round a summary of the content and the contact details and the links that we referenced. Thank you very much for your time and attendance. Thank you very much to all of those who posed questions. That's really appreciated. And we look forward to hearing from you and speaking to you over the days, weeks, months ahead. Stay safe, as the saying goes. All the best. Cheers.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jeremy.
Thanks, team.